Welcome to the Clear the Shelf podcast with Chris and Chris, the show that meets at the intersection of education and entertainment to discuss online arbitrage, retail arbitrage, wholesale, and all facets of selling on Amazon. We'll bring you news, tactics, strategies, insights, stories, and interviews to help you grow your Amazon business. And now, here are your hosts, Chris Grant and Chris Rasick. What's up, Amazon sellers, and welcome back to the Clear the Shelf podcast with myself and my epidictic co-host, Chris Rasick. Today, we'll be talking about how to properly reprice in Q4 with friend of the pod and someone who seems to know more than Google, but has better privacy settings, the co-founder of the Aura Repricer and our good friend, Dylan Carter. Dylan, glad to have you here, man. I appreciate you hanging out with us.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me back on.
Yeah, absolutely. We're surely going to travel down the path of repricing, but we'll also take a little pit stop over into AI and business musings. And I always walk away from these episodes having learned something, and I know that you guys will too. But before we get started, you know the drill. We take minutes to prepare for each episode. So we'd like to make a deal, a bit of a gentleman's agreement, if I could borrow that from My First Million. If you get something out of this episode, do us a solid, hit the like button, hit subscribe, or drop a comment wherever you might be listening. The only way for us to grow this show is to tickle the algorithm of the place you're listening, and the best way to do that is to get you to interact. All right, let's dive in. So, Dylan, normally I'd say, hey, let's set the table. Let's talk about who you are and where you're from. But I'm pretty sure just about everybody knows who you are by now. So I want to hit you with a direct, hard question first.
Okay, hit me with it.
So we've heard this rumor that there might be some new features being dropped in Aura. And I want to see if you will drop the news here first.
I will. So I have been holding back. I do a lot of these, right? Like a lot of private lives, things of that nature. And I keep wanting to talk about it, but I keep not being able to. I can today. So we're working on two big things. One is a feature that's getting released actually today, which is awesome, as of this recording. And number two, we're working on a massive product, which I can't still talk about, unfortunately. That's the most excitement I have. Shopify did something really cool during Black Friday of last year. They had this global dashboard that said, hey, here's how Shopify sellers are doing. And it was amazing. It was so cool. You get to kind of just peek behind the curtains and see the sheer volume of those things. So we were thinking, we're like, you know what, that was a cool idea. What if we did something similar, but we did it for every individual seller? And we didn't just do it for Black Friday. Black Friday is great, but we don't talk about Black Friday as the end all be all. We talk about Q4, the whole season. So what we're launching is we're calling it the Q4 Performance Dashboard. So every user gets their own version of this, and it's a really nice design dashboard that shows you for the entire Q4, how are you doing? And how are you ranking compared to other Aura users? So we're gamifying it a little bit. Are you in the top 10%, top 80%? Are you ranked number one? What's happening here? And so what's nice is instead of just looking at sales over time, we're kind of putting a little bit more presence to the season that is the Super Bowl, as I like to call it, for Amazon sellers. Mm-hmm. So you're able to get some highlights of what's your ROI look like? What's my profit margin looking like? What's my total sales, not just per day, but for all of Q4? And at the bottom, there's an actual sales graph. And so you'll notice when you log in and see it, it's not completely filled out. Why? Well, we've really made the timeline static for all of Q4. So it will end at the end of December. And so you get to see that fill in over time. And we actually highlight the specific days. So, Prime days, we've got those in there. Cyber Monday, Black Friday, those are highlighted. So you get to actually see how did I do overall for Q4, but also on these individual days. And then how do you rank? Are you doing better than 80% of the people using Aura? Or do you got a little bit more work to go with? So we're trying to kind of make it more fun in a way, right? It's like, let's surface these things and everybody's bragging on social media, as you should. It's a fun time, but can we make that a little bit more fun than it previously has been? So as far as I have looked, this is like a industry first for Amazon sellers, which I'm very excited about because it's still just the run of the mill. Here's the same screenshots I show for all of, the year, but now it's going to be a little bit more special. So we're hoping we can add a little bit more positivity and fun to the world of Amazon, especially going with these bundle policy updates and the section 3s. We're like, you know what, let's add a little bit of more positivity and fun in here.
I like it. I like that a lot. So,
Yeah.
okay, let me ask a couple of questions. One,
Yeah.
are you going to make it like, are you going to make an easy share button so that I can just share it to social
Yes.
media and things like that? Awesome. And
so
then
it won't be a share button. It will actually be a download button. So the way you download it, it'll be pre-rendered, like beautifully designed, and you can share anywhere. So you can download it if you're using Aura on your phone. Doesn't matter what device you're on. But we've designed the export so that no matter what platform you're sharing it on, it's still going to look really, really nice, which I think is important.
awesome. That is fantastic. Now the other question is, are you going to aggregate that data and have a public facing, dashboard like Shopify did, so that, we can just see, hey, based on all Aura users, and kind of here's the averages.
So we will do a blog post towards the end of December. So once Q4 is wrapped up, I want to do a massive blog post. We probably won't do like a live global dashboard, just because that's way more work, and we really want to like kind of test the waters, because this could be something we do every single Q4. It's just like on October 1st, congratulations, here's your dashboard. Let's do it again with some learnings we got from previous years. But we are going to share, like, what were the top categories? What was the average ROI, average profit margin across the board? As a company, we have tons of data. And so I think it's kind of on us to share those insights. And I think, companies like Jungle Scout does this really well. Granted, they're at massive scale with PL and things of that nature. But for us, it's like, how do we take that information, that data that we're getting access to, that we're aggregating, and then share that with people? So going into next Q4, you can kind of look and be like, all right, well, these categories did really well, or maybe these categories didn't do so well. Maybe I should avoid those moving forward. And also set good expectations, right? If the average ROI was 10%, as an example, you expecting 60 might be kind of outlandish, right? So it just gives you some benchmarks going into the following years.
Yeah, I like that a ton.
Yeah.
This is going to be a big ask, but
Okay.
is there any way I could talk you guys into, if this goes well, making this a quarterly thing? And here's the reason I ask. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the reason I ask. Another friend who's been on the show a couple times, Eli, he's like, yeah, Q4 is great. It's, we see increased prices and things like that, but he's like, I really don't treat it any differently than I do the rest of the year. I'm always buying. I'm always sending things in. Maybe I go 10 or 20% deeper during Q4. And so I would imagine there could be some learnings out of Q1 and Q2 and even in Q3. Like, where does the market shift to over time? How much growth are we seeing in, say, the supplement category as we go into Q1, because people are buying fat burners and things like that.
Right.
And in Q2, how many people are, buying, I don't know, sunscreen,
Right.
I think there could be some really fascinating trends that you could find out over time.
So that's going to be inside the thing I can't talk about yet.
Okay.
Because I agree. Because here's the big question, or not really a question. Here's the philosophy, right? And you guys have probably heard me say this countless times. Sellers are drowning in data. But the issue is kind of threefold. You don't have access to it because it's hidden behind an API, right? The amount of data I'm able to get via the API is much larger than what you just see in Seller Central. Number two, you're probably not a data analyst by training, which means even if I dumped you all this data and said, cool, go answer whatever question you have, you don't know where to get started. You don't know how to do statistics or even how to close that gap between question and answer. And so we have this problem where you actually can't answer the questions that you have, right? But you know what the questions are. And so I think part of the challenge for Amazon sellers, and really just e-commerce as a whole, that I'm seeing is you have a laundry list of questions that you either don't know how to answer or you cannot answer. But what if you could? And this is where things get really fun, because data is fuel for amazing decisions. And you should be making data-driven decisions. Well, that's hard if you don't have access to the data. So you're making gut-based decisions, which, don't get me wrong, those can be fantastic. If you have tons of experience and you've been doing this for a decade, you've already honed that. You trained your own neural net, if you will, right?
Hey, Amazon sellers, are you tired of juggling multiple tools to manage your FBA business? Well, say goodbye to the chaos and hello to Boxum, the all-in-one software that streamlines your shipments, inventory, and profitability tracking in just a few clicks. With Boxum, you'll cut your shipment time in half, gain real-time insights into your business, and keep your inventory under control, all from one simple, intuitive dashboard. Don't waste time. Try Boxum today and take your Amazon FBA game to the next level. Check it out over at cleartheshelf.com/Boxum and start your 14-day free trial now.
But as a newer seller, you don't have that. And so what happens in a world where you can have access and unlock all that amazing ocean of data and then just ask regular questions and get the answers? And what if that alone helps you think of new questions you otherwise would not have asked? Language is such an interesting thing. If I go into a new industry and I don't know the terminology, I actually have a gate that I cannot pass through until somebody gives me that terminology. I can't search on Google, what does this mean, if I don't know that that thing exists? This also can be reduced down to questions. If you don't know anything about inventory management, you can't ask the questions. Now, yes, can you go say, what are all the things related to inventory management I should know? And that will get you pretty far. But you have to understand what inventory management is as a whole before you get there. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's this branching effect that occurs that holds people back. And so if you can just start to answer the first questions that are coming to you, you start to think of the next level of questions. And it's also figuring out, like, what question am I allowed to ask in a weird way, right? Like, it's not, because there's questions you'll be like, oh yeah, that I would love to answer that, but you think you can't, so you don't even try. So if we remove the friction of being able to answer those questions, you end up in a really better place and you're able to move faster, right? So yeah, in terms of like the trends and stuff, yeah, 1,000%. But what happens when we can personalize the trends to you? That can be interesting, right? Like, do you happen to struggle with a certain category for whatever reason? Let's know that. And maybe that's a trigger to tell you, hey, I need to source better in those categories. But like, can we double click on that? Why do I struggle with those categories? Is it just a bad category, or am I doing something that I probably shouldn't be doing? Or am I approaching it wrong? And I can tweak my strategy, and now all of a sudden it's my best category, right? You have to be able to view this data in a way that does not require you to be a data analyst.
Fantastic. I'm going to be honest with you. I have a ton of follow-up questions from what you said, but I worry that we'll get into the territory of, oh, I can't really talk about that yet.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you guys, are releasing, but I'm gonna hold some questions for after the
show. Okay, perfect.
I'm glad you said the word one more time, because as I was thinking of my question, I completely forgot whether we went data or data. But you said it again. we went data. Hey, you ever do that? Like, you completely forget, like,
all the time.
The voice in your mind. It's like, all right, how do I say this out loud? Before we button this topic up, I think the questions, when people hear that, I'm trying to think of some of the more basic questions that people would have, because I don't think everyone realizes that data is the modern currency.
Yes.
Right. I think that's kind of coming into our consciousness progressively. So some people hearing you announce that may just realize, oh yeah, my repricer collects a lot of data on me. So can you address the concerns that people would have as they come to that realization, and can you talk about some of the data points that you'll use in this dashboard?
Yeah. So let's get meta on data for a second. you should be collecting as much data on your business as you can, not just for yourself, but for future AI, right? AI is going to be only as good as the data and context that you can provide. So if you want something that can help you solve problems, well, it needs to understand your exact situation, AKA your data. The Q4 dashboard, less on the meta side, but we're really looking at highlighting how are you doing during this period, and then how are you doing performance-wise on certain days, right? Black Friday, Cyber Monday, the previous Black Fridays, or previous Prime days. We'll show those days as well. And then we're looking at like, what's your average ROI profit margin? How much sales in total for Q4 did you do? How many price updates did Aura make on your behalf? Because that number is going to be massive. It's going to be so cool to see like, oh, I did like 1 million plus price updates. Like it's kind of highlighting the productivity to a certain degree, but we're really focusing on like helping you highlight how you're doing, right? Because this is what everybody's doing. Everybody wants to brag, which I love because it's so much fun. But it's like, can we do or help you do that in a way that gives a little bit more context to the whole, right? It's like, oh, I did this in January, cool, but like, or in October, but what does November look like? Is that trend going up, down? Like it kind of helps you perceive how you're doing as a whole during that quarter. And then the ranking factor, I think, is kind of cool, right? Because listen, if you're ranked number 5, you're literally the 5th best in terms of sales. So we're ranking people based on sales numbers. That's kind of cool, right? Like now it's like we're giving some context to the bragging to a certain degree and kind of making people be like, man, I'm number 12 right now. I really want to be top 10. Great. Get at it, right? Like it kind of gives you something to aspire to outside of just, I want larger numbers, which I think is kind of fun, right? The gamification thing is just a really fun aspect of it that we kind of threw in last minute. But it's going to be really, really fun. But in terms of like, questions, right? I mentioned like the categories, but also it's some of the simple stuff that's hard to see. Are my long-term storage fees increasing over time? Right? Like, can I chart that and just get ahead of it and be like, oh, it's starting to increase. It went up 10% last week. What's going on there? Let me double click on that. Well, what's causing it? Let's get to the root of it. Oh, it's actually this one product. Interesting. I didn't really think about that because I've got 2,000 SKUs. Let me go into that. And actually, I need to liquidate it because now it's costing me too much money. Great. Make the change in Aura, move on with your life. You're good to go. Like, again, how can we compress not only having the question, but noticing the thing that would give us questions, right? In computer science, you have like push versus pull. A lot of your software is pull based, meaning you have to go and have the question, then go find the answer. Ideally, we want a lot of things set up so that it gets pushed to you. Like it becomes obvious when you first land the page and you're like, oh, cool. Like that's a change. That's a bad change. Let me double click on that. So it's also like surfacing up some of these things that you otherwise would be blind to. And I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you spend any time in some of these groups and, there's no shortage of, hey, where do I find that, it's like, there's a lot of, not only do you have to pull it, a lot of sellers don't know where to pull it, so if this information actually gets pushed to you, that, I'm very curious about the execution.
I know this is where I have to pull back.
It could be, it could be groundbreaking, really. For a lot of sellers. So, so let's jump into more Amazon related, right? So Amazon, obviously, dynamic marketplace, makes repricing a crucial aspect of our businesses, especially in Q4. It becomes even more important. Increased demand, increased competition, everything. Everything's more. So should sellers be repricing differently in Q4 than they do in the rest of the year?
The answer depends. And I'll give you a good reason as to why that is. In previous years, we had so many users come to us and say, hey, we're going into Q4. What in my strategy should change? Well, you kind of have to ask yourself, well, what changes in Q4 that would facilitate a need for you to make changes in your strategy? Well, like you just mentioned, demand's going to go up. So the possibility of getting higher profit margins also goes up, but velocity itself will just go up naturally because of that demand. So although supply does increase, the demand still far outweighs the supply increase. So you can get higher profit, right? So it's interesting. And I'll give you an analogy here. When I was a seller, I was doing wholesale. I got a great brand in toys, like right in Q3, right? So it's perfect timing. Ordered thousands of units, and they were getting checked in orders or batches of 100, right? So they get checked in, I'd refresh Seller Central on my phone, and they would already be sold. Like, it was moving like crazy. So I called my brand and I go, hey, I need like 10,000 units. They said, haha, that's funny. We don't have any at the warehouse. Like, it's going to take us till February to get it from the manufacturer and then to you. So, like, sorry, but it is what it is. So I say that to illustrate it's an awesome opportunity, but to what degree are you maximizing that opportunity, right? Because you don't really want to run out, right? It was great that I sold through everything, great margins, all that good stuff, but I also wasn't repricing at the time. So I missed out not only on the potential increase in price or profit margin, also I sold out too fast. And so this is where we get into like the equilibrium aspect of what we talk about with Maven, right? You have this optimal price. It finds the balance between sales velocity and profit margin. Well, this is a dynamic calculation. So wouldn't it make sense as the demand is ramping up that the price increases? Yes, absolutely. And so you don't want to be moving things too fast, because if you sell out halfway through Q4 and you can't restock, well, then you're probably only 50%, maybe even 40% optimized for the entire season. And so you really want to think about what percentage of the opportunity am I claiming? Because you might think you had an awesome Q4 because you sold through everything, and that's exciting. But the reality of it is you only got 30% of what you could have done. So maybe you moved things too fast, you weren't repricing up, all these different things. And so to get back to the point of like what changes, a lot changes, but we built Maven with the idea of Q4 in mind, because we had gone through it as sellers, and we're like, man, you shouldn't have to ask that question. Because in reality, what should happen is the system itself notices the changes and reacts to it for you. And so we built Maven in such a way that it can handle those things. There is no max price that you're manually setting unless you want to. And so what's nice is that dynamic, that auto max. Well, listen, if we've been selling at 45, but we can realistically get to 58, shouldn't your max be able to move with the market? Of course it should. And shouldn't we have an adjustable dynamic target, AKA that optimal price, as the market itself is moving? Of course we should. And so part of it is like taking all that complexity and building it into an AI model that can do that stuff for you. Because I think where a lot of sellers get caught, and what has historically been true, is you have to go in and be the expert, and you have to figure out, well, how am I going to maximize this? And there's a lot of management of the complexity that you as a seller have to do. From my perspective, I want to remove as much of that as possible so that you're focusing on the thing that really drives your growth, which is buying more. So if you've got a dynamic model that's actually handling Q4 for you, and your sole goal is just ship as much as you can because you don't want to run out, that's a better situation than having to say, well, this is my Q4 strategy. Because what's really going to change? Well, you might still target the buy box, sure, but you know there's going to be increased competition. So that doesn't fully work. You want to be able to raise prices as often as you can. Your max prices should be adjusting. So if you're trying to create a rule-based Q4 strategy, you can do it, but there's going to be limitations because things are moving too fast, right? I talk about this all the time. Sellers are dealing with speed and complexity as the two biggest problems. Well, what increases during Q4? Well, the speed and the complexity, right? You have to be able to reprice dramatically faster and factoring in far more variables. And so when you pair something like Maven handling the complexity with Hyperdrive, which I think we're still the only one who has this functionality. Like every time somebody asks me, when should I use Hyperdrive? My go-to example is toys in Q4. Like there's so much demand happening that's like 10 seconds matters, right? But the number of competitors is going to increase. How fast? Like being in the buy box or raising your price every few seconds could mean the difference between you getting to 80% efficiency or optimization during Q4 or being at 40%. And so all these things that we've been preaching during regular season, just get heightened and they start to matter even more. And so what we've tried to do is say, hey, here's the foundation. Here's how it should work during regular Q1, Q2, Q3, but it's going to work even better going into Q4 with less management on your side. And that's what's important here. Because again, just selling really fast feels awesome. But once you realize, well, I sold out and I could have raised, 20% and still sold out, but towards the latter half of Q4, it made far more dollars. That's a missed opportunity to me. And so I keep coming back to this mindset of like, what percentage of the opportunity are we claiming as sellers? And that's what I want you to maximize.
What do you what do you say to, and this is, I love talking about this. I love listening about it. But it feels like a lesson with fewer and fewer ears willing to hear it. We seem to be moving towards a just blow it out as fast as possible marketplace, and as third party sellers. So what do you say? What would you say to try to change that mindset and shift more sellers into the complexity that the marketplace should be, really?
Are you building a company or a side hustle? Because if you're building a side hustle, you're operating from a scarcity mindset. That's just a fact. You're trying to get your dollars back as fast as possible. And there's a sweet spot where that makes sense and where you're just missing the opportunity. If you're thinking about building a company, a business over a long period of time, you're going to make different decisions. And don't get me wrong, I've spent tens of thousands of dollars a month on inventory and wanted it back as fast as possible. But I wanted it back as fast as possible because of scarcity. You have to break that habit. You have to understand, again, what is the opportunity for every single listing, and am I maximizing as much as I can per listing? So it's very easy to just be like, well, I sold it all out, I'm done. And that is successful. I'd rather you do that than have 80% of your inventory left over in Q1. Don't get me wrong. But the optimal here is you have a little bit left over going into Q1 that you can still sell through, right? Because that means you didn't miss out the opportunity. It's really hard. This is an optimization problem, which is really difficult. And it's hard to forecast. It's hard to get this right. But if you can aim to not run out of inventory, you're going to aim to maximize the opportunity. And listen, we've, up until Maven and the optimal price kind of philosophy, we've had even the philosophy of target the buy box, maximize buy box price, all that good stuff. But when you look at the data, does it work compared to not doing it? Sure. But the reality of it is that outcome naturally leads to downward pressure on the buy box, AKA lower profit margin. So this is why we have this balance of sales velocity and profit margin. These are opposing forces. These are the only two levers you have to pull, right? If you want increased velocity, you're going to have to accept lower profit margin, and vice versa is true. The difficulty is finding the balance at every given moment, because it can shift second by second, which we as humans just can't do. And role-based strategies can't really do it either. So by necessity, we've had to have the philosophy of I measure success with my repricing tool based on my sales went up and my buy box ownership percentage went up. But that's not the best alternative. It's just what we're used to. And there's limitations to the technology that made it so that that was the best way to measure it. Now we're saying that's actually not true, because if you look at how we calculate the optimal price, it tends to be slightly above the buy box. Well, why is that? It's because you have added competition. So from an economics perspective, you have downward pressure on the price. What we're trying to say is, well, what if you could relieve that price or that downward pressure as often as possible? Does that lead to a slightly better outcome? Actually, it does. And so what's interesting is in a lot of cases, when people move over, they may see a 1 to 2% decrease in sales velocity, but their profit margin goes up. So they're making more dollars. And some people will say, well, but I'm losing velocity. Correct. But I would argue you were out of balance and we're bringing you back into balance. And sometimes it could be the inverse. I rarely see this, but it can be the case where they're too conservative. And I'm like, yeah, your prices look healthy, but you're not selling as best as you could. So if we bring your profit margin down, we can boost your sales velocity back up and you're still optimized. And I think this is the big thing, right? It's like getting to a place of optimization. What is the best case scenario every second of every day? That's where you should be at. You know, we talk about the yo-yo strategy. Here's a good example here. People will do the yo-yo at some time-based frequency every 3 hours at midnight, what have you. That is, and again, I'd rather you do that than not do it. But the reality of it is that is not as optimal as it could be, because how do you know that for every single SKU, every 3 hours is the right time to do it? And what happens if on that 3 hours you raise your price, and let's say you went up from 20% ROI to 40% ROI, and you didn't get a sale, you actually missed the sale at 20% because you raised. Or within the 3 hours, you didn't raise and you could have gotten 40% ROI. So with Maven, we're taking that yo-yo strategy and saying, well, it shouldn't be the strict time-bound thing. That's actually very, very rigid, and rigid doesn't work in dynamic world. Instead, what if we could read the listing, your competition, all these different things, and understand behaviorally when's the right time to do it, and then do it that many times? Because it's going to be different on every single listing, right? You really have to isolate how each listing is being managed. And this is where it's hard for rule-based strategies to do that, but Maven can. But if you get to that place, it really helps you to think very differently, right? So again, you know, buy box ownership percentage went up, sales went up. That sounds great, but I can hack both those things. I just lower your prices by 20% and you got those. Well, I just traded profit margin for sales velocity. But are you happy? Probably not, right? And so you need to be thinking of, there's this seesaw, right? You want as many of your listings balanced on that seesaw as possible. If you're there, you're doing really well, because you're not trading velocity for profit margin or the inverse. You're getting the best of both worlds. And that's really difficult to do. But Maven, with this new technology, allows us to actually calculate what the balance is and get you to that balance as often as possible. And so we kind of have to reframe how we're thinking about repricing to a certain degree. Gone are the days of trying to get 80% buy box ownership. I see that number on Twitter and I go, you're missing out on profit margin and you don't even realize it. Some of these things become a vanity metric for bragging rights. And it's like, cool, I'm owning 80% of it. Yeah, but man, how many more dollars could you take home if you're at 40%? And is 40% necessarily worse than 80%? I don't know. Depends on the math. And that's the hard part, right? This is the complexity that as sellers, it's hard to be able to do this at scale. And there's also a bunch of newer sellers who may never hear the term yo-yo strategy, but still be able to get the benefits of it through the performance using Maven. And so how do we take all these hacks and awesome things that were discovered by sellers and say, what if we just did that in a better way, where the end user doesn't even need to know that that thing exists? Again, going back to my comment about language limits you. Well, if you've never heard the term yo-yo, you can't use it. Well, with Maven, you can and still not know that it is ever a thing. And that's a cool place to get to.
It's fascinating. I think, you know, the abundance mentality is probably one of the foundations of hustle culture.
Yeah.
But yet blowing out your inventory as fast as possible is scarcity mentality. You know, it's a complete contradiction. That's fascinating.
Yeah, a lot of what we do is counterintuitive, which is, I think, frustrating for sellers, because they're like, well, rationally, this makes sense. Correct. But not everything rational is true in the world of Amazon.
I know you guys have a ton of data. And so I'm curious, and you may or may not have this, but do you have any data pre-Maven versus post-Maven and what it's done like overall to ROI and margins to the users of Aura?
I don't have the exact numbers, but overall, the profit margin has increased, like on average. That's a huge thing. Like, even if you go on Twitter and search Aura Repricer or Aura Repricing, you'll constantly see people sharing, like, I got to sell at 45, and then 10 minutes later, got to sell at 52. So we're constantly being able to see that, which is good. That's been the biggest impact, honestly. And what's cool about that, though, is I'm asking less of you as the end user, right? So like, your role-based strategies have anywhere from 15 to 30 settings you have to do correctly, which, although we help and support with those things, Maven has one. You just need to set your min values, and that's automated too if you have your costs in there, right? I want 10%, 20% ROI minimum. You guys handle everything else. And so what's nice is when somebody's like, dude, I'm the laziest repricing user ever. I'm like, then you're going to love us. And because I'm like, it's literally less work, so less friction, and you get increased performance. That's technical leverage, right? I'm a big leverage guy. Technical leverage is probably one of the best types of leverage you could ever get. And it makes you feel, I mean, when you get a sale that was raised by 50% and you did nothing yourself to make that happen, that's a good feeling. And when it happens consistently, because it's not going to always happen, right? Mm-hmm. But when it happens consistently, you start to feel and think a little different.
Absolutely. Okay. I want to play bad guy for a minute. Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So there are some very smart sellers out there who use, use other repricers, the competition. Yeah. And their argument is that, the funny argument is, well, Aura is not difficult enough to use, is what I'll say. But no, but in reality, what they're saying is, well, I can't put enough customizations on it.
Right.
And they're using repricers with AI as well.
Sure.
And I know you respect this other company also, but
yeah.
They're like, well, I can't get quite as granular. What do you say to those people? How do you push back on that argument?
So I don't fully push back, because there are times where you need a certain level of control. So there's always exceptional listings, right? There's a reason why we still have role-based strategies. They still serve their use case very well. So I don't think we'll ever get to a point where it's just pure AI black box and like that's all you get. My initial excitement was that would be the case. In seeing the data, I don't think that's true, because again, every listing is so different than the next. And so we kind of think about this in levels, right? Level 1 is like you default to Maven, let it optimize itself, be good to go. Then you get to level 2, and that's when you probably want to start moving things faster, right? You want to prioritize velocity over profit margin because you've held it too long, what have you. That's when you go into rule-based and you target the buy box, because that's going to increase velocity. And then level 3 is really, you're going to liquidate, right? We just released a help doc on exactly this and walking users through this, because a lot of it comes down to like, well, when do I use certain strategies in what way? We're trying to give a model for how to think about this. So there are cases where you want to be granular and in the nitty gritty, but there's a balance. And I think this is where things get tough. There's one, I forget what it's called, but basically you code your own in their interface. It's great for the type of person who wants exactly what they want to do. But my argument against that is, one, the average seller is not doing that. They don't want to do that. That's too much. That's the super nerdy version of like, I want to control it all. And that's great. Don't get me wrong. There's things where like, I'm just going to code it myself because I want exactly this use case. The average seller is not that person. And you kind of have to take a step back and think, how much time are you spending in your repricing tool trying to perfectly optimize things versus sourcing? And I think some people truly just enjoy being in there and inking out these 1% gains. But if you're a business owner, is that the best use of your time? Probably not. And so there's definitely a balance between hands-off and hands-on. We try to find that balance where you can be hands-on if you want to be, or you can be hands-off if you don't want to be, and you're not missing out on performance because you want to be hands-off. The average seller has a job. The average seller is working full-time, has kids, wants to get amazing performance, but doesn't want to have to become an expert at repricing to pull that off. And so there's nothing wrong with it, but there is something to be said about being able to take a massive aspect of your business and moving it to the background and letting it take care of itself, freeing up your mental space to then go focus on the thing that really matters, which is sourcing. And so I think it's just a different mindset. And that's not to say, again, that, wanting to be nitty gritty doesn't make sense. In some listings, I mean, this is what we do in support, right? We'll have somebody come through with a SKU and say, hey, this one's acting kind of weird. We'll take a look, analyze it, be like, actually, I know exactly what we need to do here. We'll build a custom strategy just for that. So it still has use cases, but you want to think like the 80-20, right? how do I have one strategy, maybe two, that handles 80 to 90% of my listings really well? And then you're going to have that last 10 to 20% of your listings that are going to be kind of exceptions. In which case we might need to build a rule-based strategy there.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. You talked a bit about, people working from this scarcity mindset, maybe blowing inventory out too fast. And that's kind of one of the mistakes that Amazon sellers make. But what is maybe the second or third biggest mistake you see sellers make, especially when it comes to repricing, like in Q4?
Thank you for listening to the Clear the Shelf podcast. My magnanimous co-host Chris Rasick has put together a gift for you for being a listener. It's called the Monthly Goal Tracking Spreadsheet, and it's free. The spreadsheet will help you break down and track how much you've purchased, which should be a leading indicator of how much you will sell, and then you'll be able to track how much you've sold as well as your estimated monthly profit on a daily basis. This will all feed into the daily averages so you can ensure that you're on track to meet your goals each and every month. Grab it for free today over at cleartheshelf.com/goal-tracking. Thanks again for being a listener. Now back to the show.
Well, a lot of sellers don't reprice during Q4 because they're, especially newer sellers, there's still this ethos of repricers only go down. And in some cases that is true. So they just they want control. I think what a lot of sellers try to do is they try to control the chaos. And so they're in there manually doing things. It's like, again, historically that you kind of needed to a certain degree. With things like Maven, you don't have to anymore. So I think being able to kind of take a step back and say, instead of micromanaging your listings, can we put a system in place that can manage that at scale? That's going to help relieve a lot of that stress. But a lot of people are just not repricing. And so they go, cool, I just sold out like I did. I sold out of 300 units in 10 minutes. This is awesome. Well, yeah, dude, because you're the lowest seller now because somebody sold out and you're not repricing up. So you have the buy box and that looks great, but you could also raise your price by $20 and still be the lowest in the buy box and make more money. Mm-hmm. You can automate a lot of those things. So I think that's one. And the third one is like just not having enough inventory, right? And again, this is really hard to do. Forecasting is a very difficult thing to get right unless you have tons of data, and that's just really hard. In the ideal state, you want to have just a little bit of inventory left over going into Q1, because that means you actually maximize how much inventory you could sell. If you sell halfway, great. You now can't restock. You're blocked. And it's just like, again, better than not selling, but we missed the opportunity here. So doing your best to figure out how can I either preload knowing that I can't restock during, or working with your brands, your suppliers to understand how much buffer do they have that I can tap into last minute if I need to, while still factoring in logistic hurdles and all that stuff. Because again, you want to, the way you maximize the opportunity is enough inventory and the right repricing. That's all it really comes down to, in my opinion.
Beautiful.
So so you get to look at hundreds of thousands of data points. That's been the theme to the show. So you get that on your end. What are some trends that stick out to you that you can share with us? And how stuff that Amazon sellers could take advantage of?
Yeah. The biggest one that comes to mind is the average ROI is not as high as you think it is. Granted, this is an average, so there's a variance to the data, but I love seeing people on Twitter, Instagram, whatever, being like, here's 200% ROI. Great. My go-to is, how many units can you sell and can you keep doing it? There's this, and I've talked to sellers where they're like, I only buy things at 100% ROI. And they say it kind of bragging. I'm like, that's cool. Do you sell it at 100% ROI? Because realistically for OA specifically, it's like 15 to 20% is the mins I tend to see. And if you're doing 20 to 30% actual ROI on sales, I think that's a pretty solid move. A lot of newer sellers want these big numbers because they look nice, but they don't realize to scale, you're going to have to take smaller profit margins. That's just how it works, right? There's a limited number of pieces of inventory that you can do those things on, right? So yeah, you can do it one-off, And maybe you have one SKU that's just crushing it all the time, but your average account's not going to be doing that. And even when I was a seller, I would take an 8% ROI wholesale item if I didn't have anything else to spend that capital on, right? So you have to think about the efficiency of your capital. If it's just sitting there and not being spent, well, that's wasted. I'd rather take an 8% in 2 weeks return than a 0% return on nothing. So you can kind of trade these things up. So you can certainly scale by taking lower ROIs when you're flush with cash. And I think a lot of sellers get stuck with this. They let their cash sit there waiting for the next best thing. Instead, what they should be doing is taking smaller bets on things that are going to sell within 2 to 3 weeks. So when another next best thing comes in, you can just so in wholesale, I would take the 8% minimum, but then I'd get a new SKU that would be 12%. I was like, cool. Well, now I have to make a decision. I'm not going to reorder the 8. I'll reorder the 12. Take that capital. I've got new capital. I'll order the 12% and the 8% again, and I'll rinse and repeat. Right. And so a lot of sellers don't do that because they think, well, I can only buy at X ROI. It depends though. If you're struggling with cash, maybe, but if you have enough capital that's just sitting there, you should be spending it even on lower ROI items, assuming you can move them fast enough. But at scale, you're probably going to see closer to 15 to 20% gross ROI. That's the biggest one.
Why is it that people are happy to have money stuck in, say, a 401k at an 8% cash on cash return over the course of a year?
Yes.
But if that same 8% cash on cash return happens in 45 to 60 days, people think that you don't know how to run a business.
I have no idea. And I'm a finance major, right? So I took managerial accounting, and literally I was sitting in that class being like, wait, I can apply this to Amazon wholesale right now. And I literally did. And I was like, wait, this is the unlock for cash management. This is how you make the decisions. And there is a bit of ego of well, I'm not going to do that. It's not good enough. Well, how do you define that? What's the alternative? Now, yeah, should you buy a 20% ROI thing over an 8%? Of course you should. That's mathematically correct. But it is weird that we go, oh, that's only 8%. What garbage? Okay, but if the alternative is it sits in your bank account and earns you nothing, that is a good decision. Holding all else equals. And so I don't know. I think our industry, in my opinion, lacks some financial literacy to a degree. And you guys have heard me say this for years, you need to be reading the foundational books on business, not just learning about Amazon, right? And it's the unsexy things that become a massive unlock because it gives you a framework for how to make decisions. And there are decisions that you should make that to an outsider is the wrong decision. So for somebody who is strapped with cash, who's struggling with capital, they shouldn't be buying the 8% thing. But for somebody who has enough capital, they should be. And so where we get to is this world of simplistic recommendations. You should only do X. That's not true. The reality of it is it depends. And so when somebody gives me this big question of what should I do, I go, email me offline because I have a few questions before I give you advice. Because there is no one size fits all recommendation. It depends on your situation. That's just a fact. And so I think we lose subtle nuances to make post sound better, right? This overarching, you should never do this. Great, I'll never do that. But what if in your case, you should be doing that? But it's not a good social post to be like, well, here's when you should and when you shouldn't. Here's the nuances of it. People don't want to have to think through something to make the right decision. They just want to be told what to do in a lot of cases. And so we find ourselves with a lot of people basically creating somebody else's business with different circumstances. And that's why you have a lot that are like, well, I'm doing exactly what that dude says. Yeah, but that dude's in a completely different scenario. And ask that dude what he was doing when he was at your level. I guarantee you it was different because it should be different. And yeah, we miss those nuances, which is frustrating, but you need to be reading books outside of Amazon to understand how things work from a first principles framework, not just these examples given online. And it's not that there's anything wrong with those, but you need to build your own internal foundations for how you're going to make decisions. Because otherwise, somebody who has no risk in your business, you have 100% of the risk because it's your thing. Somebody else is telling you how to do that with no ramifications. Like if you make that bad decision, that's ultimately on you. And so you need to be able to get to a point where you can make those decisions in a smart way for yourself. But that's harder.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't that essentially the same argument that you're making for AI-based repricing versus rules-based? You know, these
Right.
people are following rules-based business advice to
Right.
where it's like, okay, if this, you do this, you know,
Right.
to where, you know, it's evolving to where AI is a much better business process. That's kind of interesting.
I mean, what if the AI can understand the nuances better than you ever could and personalize it to your situation? Say, here's what you should do. Like, I understand the best practices in inventory management. I understand your data. Here's what we should do in those cases. And it might be completely counterintuitive, but actually make a ton of sense.
All right, so this is a good time for us to switch gears a little bit. You talked about, you know, being an operator, and we've talked about first principles and all those things. And I consider you to be a great operator when it comes to running a
Appreciate
business.
it.
So, you know, what are some ways that might be helpful for Amazon sellers to start thinking about adopting an operator mindset in their business?
The first thing is your identity. This is going to sound weird. This is another theme in the conversation. Language matters, right? If you go look up books written for business owners, and then you go look up books written for founders, they will give you different advice. But isn't the founder of a business the business owner? And aren't most business owners the founder of the business? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's these cohorts, these segments of people being created using language. And in our Amazon world, we are business owners, not founders. You'll never hear me say I'm the business owner ever. I'm a founder, period. Why? Because that changes the decisions I make and my perspective I have. It's very easy for a lot of us to do this, to want a great lifestyle. And, you know, I've got all the people in place and like, I'm not in day to day, and it's like a badge of honor. And there's nothing wrong with that, again. But as a founder, I am deeply in day to day. Like before we jumped in on this, I was in a design sync on this new feature. So it comes down to like, what is your identity? And then how are you going to operate? Like a good example here between business owner and founder, business owners are told to outsource everything less than whatever your value is. Again, nothing wrong with delegation, not crapping on that. But it's usually hire somebody not as smart as you because it's cheaper. A founder does the inverse. We hire people much smarter than us and much better than us at each skill and role. I should be the dumbest one in the company as a founder. As a business owner, you are the supreme. You are the head honcho, blah, blah, blah. Cool. Sounds great. You got a team of 30 VAs. Awesome. Who cares? I'd rather have 5 amazing people who are owning their role, who know it better than I can, who can do it better than I can, who I pay really, really well. And again, I don't care where they live. It's less about like, is it a VA or not? And more so, are you trying to stroke your ego by being the smartest one in the company? Or do you want to hire amazing people who can outshine you and build an incredible company? Because those two things are very different. Like you can hire people that will manage day to day and do exactly what you tell them to. It costs a lot more to hire somebody to say, hey, your goal in this role is to achieve X, Y, and Z. I don't know how to do it. That's on you. Right? Like outsourcing is, here's the SOP. I wrote it for you. Here's exactly what you need to do. And they do it to a T. Hiring for a role is hiring for an outcome. You say, I don't know how we're going to do this. That's your job. It's your job to solve the problem. As a business owner, a lot of times it's your job to solve the problem and then give the solution to the person. So at that point, are you really getting their intelligence? No. You're getting their hours. I don't hire people for hours. I hire people for their brain. I want them to bring everything they can. If they have awesome ideas, I want them to have the freedom and the ownership and the responsibility to take that on and say, hey, we could be doing this 10 times better. Here's what I think we should do. Great, go run with it. I didn't have to think about that. They did. And so I tell everybody we hire, I'm not hiring you for this role. I'm not hiring you for a set of tasks. I'm hiring you for your brain, because the role should evolve. The tasks should change. If you can automate 90% of your role, do it. Because I promise you, we got more things to get done here. And it's a different mindset, right? And it gets your people thinking like, man, like Dylan just told me I could find a way to automate 90% of my role, my job's safe, and I'll be able to do more things. Is that right for the business? Yeah. Yes. And it's a different philosophy. Like, we don't pay people hourly. I don't care about your time. I care about the outcomes. Everybody gets a salary, period. If you can pull it off working 20 hours a week, do it. I promise you, we got more to get done. And so I think to get to that operator mindset, you have to study good operators. And good operators are not running these small businesses. They're running scalable business. Go learn how Stripe grew. I don't have the book with me right now, but the COO of Stripe, go read her stuff. I think it's Claire Dixon Hughes. That'll teach you a lot of how to run things. And that's a high growth startup. That's a tech company, but guess what? You can learn and take the best practices from tech and apply it to this business here. Cause that fundamentally, they're still businesses at the end of the day. So I think it requires you to change how you view yourself, what you're building, and how you're going to build it. And then just studying, how did other people build incredible things, and what can I recreate or steal from them? I'm a big fan of doing that. Go to a random industry, learn the best practices, and then just apply them here where it makes sense. Like, you'll never hear me say I run an Amazon software company. No, I run a tech company. Why? Because language matters. The best practices being done in Amazon software are not best practices. So what we do is we take best practices from the startup tech world and apply it to what we do. And that's how we've been able to stand out. That's how we build better product. That's why we look and feel and are used differently than our competition. We're building differently. It's not because we're innately better. It's because we're taking the best practices that have been formulated over a decade and just applying those as the foundation, and then innovating on top of it. And what's crazy, it's not even hard to do. So like, our support is exactly the same way. Everybody told us it's not worth your time as a founder. Don't do it. I said, well, I can learn a ton, and startup founders do this, so I'm going to do it. And everybody was saying, oh, outsource that to VAs, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, first principles, I've hated that experience as a seller. So what if we did the inverse? And how are other people building it in such a scalable way? Oh, by the way, they write blog posts on all this stuff because they want to teach. Steal it, apply it, and then build upon it. And then you look like a genius. But the reality is I'm just going out to the world and saying, who's the best at this one thing I'm trying to figure out? And then just using their education, their information as a foundation to get to 80% day one. And then saying, cool, now through my experience, that last 20% gets unlocked. And it's not that difficult. I mean, it's time consuming, but it's just a different perspective, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I've got two follow-ups. One's more of I guess something I'm thinking about, but I like that. I like the copy. I like the steel. Yeah, I read something about Monish Pabrai, who's known as the Indian Warren Buffett.
Okay.
And someone asked him, like, how did you become? He's worth like $500 million. I'm like, how did you become worth this much money? And he says, I found what worked, and I just shamelessly copied everything I could.
Yes.
And I don't know, that struck me particularly strong over this past weekend. But the other thing is sometimes we're not so great as Amazon sellers about kind of thinking in that manner. So could you give us an example of, like, where might that first hire be to help me? I'm to a point where I'm doing everything. I know that I probably need some help. Where do I install that first person who's smarter than me in the business?
Yeah. So I do like Dan Martell's buy back your time philosophy. He kind of walks through this, and his go-to first is an assistant. I don't have an assistant. I think AI can take care of a lot of things. But a good kind of philosophy is to look and like separate the parts of the business into like departments almost. Like, okay, I have a sourcing department, I have a fulfillment department, I have whatever. What percentage of your time is going into each department? Right? So for most sellers, it's going to be sourcing. Okay. What type of person could I hire to handle this? Now, where a lot of sellers go wrong is they go, well, this one aspect is time consuming, so I'm going to hire a VA just to run this one piece of it. That's where you want to pause and say, well, what if I could hire somebody for more money to own the whole thing? Right? So instead of outsourcing the task, you're hiring for the role. And could you find somebody who has experience running purchasing for an e-commerce company or a company that is similar enough to what you do? So they already have the frameworks, they already understand what you're doing. There's just going to be some subtle nuances. All right, let's do that. What's cool about like an Amazon business, it's actually highly scalable, right? The biggest limitations is going to be how much inventory can you purchase and how much capital do you have? That's kind of it, right? So all the other stuff is pretty much automated, if not just not there. I mean, like you don't need somebody to manage your logistics. If you're using a prep center, that's an easy outsource. But maybe you have somebody who can do inventory management. Let's say you're doing wholesale. You have somebody come in and say, hey, listen, I need you to own how we restock. I need you to analyze the data. It's a full-time role. I want you to make sure that the way we're restocking makes the most sense. They need to be data-driven. They need to have some KPIs to target, and they're going to place the orders themselves. That's a good one, actually, for wholesale. It's not super time-consuming, but it's one of those things that, are you even looking at your inventory management to forecast better and optimize your capital efficiency? Probably not. And that person could also own, hey, part of this role is making our capital more efficient. There's probably a lot of brands we're working with where we're not using net terms. Go find the ones where it makes sense for us to use net 30, go negotiate on our behalf, and let's make this happen. And then work with me to make sure that our cash flow is stabilized in such a way that we can do the net terms and it not hurt our cash flow. Well, now you just said, go do that. They're going to own that, come back, be like, cool, got you. Here's exactly what we're going to do. Oh, by the way, I want you to build the playbooks for these things. That's one area. So again, I hate to come back to it depends because it sounds like a cop out, but you really have to analyze where you're spending a lot of your time and then think about what's the type of person that I could hire that could actually do the whole thing better than I can. This does not mean that you get out to go hire a VA for $8 an hour when you suck at sourcing to say, you go figure it out for me. That's not how this works. You still need to have a deep enough understanding to basically be able to call BS and set good, successful metrics. So like I can go to, Finn or Casey on our team and I can measure their success through my experiences because I built that system out. But now it's them solving the big problems and I'm just making sure we're staying on target, right? But how do I get to 10 minutes for median response time as the goal? Go out to the market, figure out what makes sense. Can I even hit that? Okay, let's figure this out. So you still should be, it's like you as the founder, you should be going into the unknown and getting like 80% good enough at it. And then saying, okay, this is actually a viable thing. Now I should hire somebody to manage the whole thing. So like for Google Ads, when we started running that, I learned and did it myself. I spent the first $100,000 myself. We're like, oh, this is a great channel. Now we should hire somebody who's way better experienced and skill and a better skill set than I have to take it and run with it. Now I'm kind of out of that. Now they know what's best and I don't. And they're like, hey, Dylan, you did this and that was stupid. Great. Fix it. Like, go for it. So you really want to get away from like, I am the end all be all. Here's exactly how I want you to do it. And more so like, I have figured out to this degree, I know that it works. I need somebody to come in and help me scale it who has more experience in that kind of world than I do. I'm going to hand over my foundations and say, you run with it. You own it though. So it's a different perspective. So when you start to say, well, I can give a VA this, I can get, why? A lot of people will have VAs for managing like scheduling. You use Howie.ai for that. You don't need a human to do that anymore. It's $15 a month instead of, $8 an hour. So like you have to pause and say, well, what is the thing that is time consuming? What is the thing that's also working? Because a lot of sellers want to outsource things that are time consuming, but they shouldn't be doing, period. Right. And so it's not just the time consuming thing. It's also what's the opportunity here, right? from a sourcing perspective, if you're like, man, I got a good system, but I can't spend enough and I have enough cash, that's probably a good opportunity. Like, cause now you have cash that's sitting in the bank that you're not spending because you don't have the time or capacity, what have you. So that would be a huge unlock for your growth, right? I tend to say you always have one of two problems. You have a growth problem or you have a block problem. If you analyze everything and you say, okay, well, what's the singular thing that if I were to do would lead to the biggest growth? That's your biggest growth lever. And then what's the biggest thing that if I removed as a blocker, I would grow faster? You should have these two things top of mind at all times, and then try to work really diligently to solve that. If you're like, man, I've really got a good foundation for sourcing, I could realistically hand this over to somebody else and they could crush it. Great, go do that. Especially if you're not going to run out of capital, because it's bad when you try to hire a VA full time and you week one run out of cash to spend and now they're just sitting on their hands, right? So you want to think through from that lens too. But yeah, you can break down the business into categories. Like, we're a small team, but I still say this is the marketing department, this is the customer success department, this is engineering, this is operations, this is finance. And you kind of in your mind treat it as such and say, well, what would be the next best hire to handle those things that not only can just do what I tell them to do, but could tell me what we should be doing that we're not doing. Again, you want more intelligence. And this is why AI is such an interesting concept. Why do you hire people? Well, you hire people for their intelligence, not for their time. It's a very different thing. Well, what happens when the cost of intelligence dramatically goes down? You don't need to hire 20 VAs. Maybe you need 3 digital sourcing assistants, and that's enough. So it's a different mindset.
So this is all very upsetting to a micromanager, hiring people smarter than you.
Sure.
But
yeah.
And I say that as a joke, but how do you, so for someone with the micromanagement tendencies, and the people, the business owners who know how to do everything, and their ultimate goal is, and I've said this on the podcast myself, is hire somebody, try to get them best case scenario to about 75% of the skill and talent that I am, and then that's how I outsource. So flipping that mindset to more of a founder, how do you reconcile the fact that you're now hiring people smarter than you, and you're going to lose control of this process, and worst case scenario, that person leaves, and you no longer have, you're not omniscient in your business anymore. You've had smarter people enhance it. So how do you reconcile that?
So one, everything should be documented because people will come and go, right? So how things are done is the responsibility of that hire. So I do expect everybody on the team to document how things are done. Because even if somebody just goes on vacation for a week and the thing still has to get done, hand it to me, but I still need to know how it's done. There's some things in support world that I don't know how to do, but I had to jump on one day because both my guys were on vacation. I was like, hey, just quick sync, walk me through where the docs are. They're like, oh, it's all right here. Here's how I handle certain things. I go, great. But also, like, on the control side, it's not that they just have free reign to do anything, right? Most of the time they're going to have an idea, come to me and be like, hey, I'm thinking about this. And sometimes they're right. And I'm like, dude, go for it. It makes a ton of sense. Other times I'm like, hey, you're kind of missing this, solve for that, and then come back to me. So you're not just saying, hey, go figure it out and like, don't keep me in the loop. No, you should be in the loop. Like, we do daily stand-ups at 11 a.m. with the whole team. So I know what everybody's working on. And then I do one-on-ones weekly with everybody directly under me. Right. So if somebody has an idea, they don't just implement it. They can go and test some stuff, but they're coming to me with the idea and saying, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Does that resonate? And I'll say, yeah, that's actually a good idea. Think about it from this way as well. Okay, what are some ways we can measure success here? Okay, we agree on that. Okay, now go. So you become more like a project manager in a certain type of way. So you're not losing touch with how things are done, but you are kind of leveling up and saying, I really don't care about the nitty gritty things because like I have good enough people, they can self-solve a lot of those things. But when it's a big change, they're going to come to me before implementation. And we're going to make sure we're talking the same language, we're on the same page here. And then it's up to them to execute, right? So you're still leading on strategy, but you're allowing a lot of your team to handle execution and the ideation of things. Because there are things like, I don't think about support as much as I did when I was doing it full time. So who's best to make decisions or give me feedback? It's going to be the people doing it, right? So I might have an idea and they'd be like, actually, that's not what we're seeing in support. I don't think that's a problem. Okay, cool. I'm going to take that very heavily weighted and say, okay, let's shelve my idea. What do you guys think? Well, we think this, and here's what we're seeing that justifies that theory. Awesome. Let's go look into that now. So it does take a little bit of time, and it's also trust, right? When somebody first comes into the company, you don't give them 100% trust. Now, you hope that you did enough due diligence on the hiring front that you can trust them at a foundational level, but over time, you see how they make decisions, and they learn how you would want them to make certain decisions because they understand the values and core beliefs of the company, and they go, okay, like I would have done it this way, but as a company, we do it this way, locked in. And so over time, you go, hey, how'd you make that decision? Well, here's how I made it. Rational decision, makes a lot of sense. Exactly what I would have done. Go for it. And then you get to a point where you're like, hey, you don't need to pull me into a meeting. Just like Slack me, be like, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Here's why I want to do it. Sound good? Sure. So you get there, but in startup world, the best practice is hire slow, fire fast. So we do a lot of due diligence. Yeah, I'm looking at that person's skill set, but I'm mainly looking at them as a person. Are they curious? Do they have good ownership? Are they responsible? Do they care about the end customer? Like all these different things. I'm trying to get like a base personality that would work well. Because if they're intelligent enough and they're curious and ambitious enough, they can probably solve most things that they've never seen before. And a lot of times in the outsourcing world, you hire somebody who can do that one thing very well, but they might have a horrible personality and you never tested for it. Right? So you have to do a lot more due diligence on the front end of a hire than on the back end. Because if you did enough of that, you avoid a lot of the pitfalls on the back end. And that takes iteration. Like we still make mistakes, certainly. But every hire, when you do it this way and you have a playbook, so an SOP of how you do it, you start to say, okay, well, we messed up. We didn't notice this one red flag. Okay, let's bake that into the process for the next hire so we avoid that moving forward. So you learn as you go, right? I'm a big fan of creating documentation, even just for yourself, because now you're not having to recreate the wheel. You're taking lessons learned and baking it into the process itself. And that's a good thing. So yeah, it's difficult, but I think it's a skill set you kind of have to build if you want to build a big enough company. And you don't have to want to build a big company, right? It's whatever you want. But I can tell you first and foremost, it's a very different feeling when you have highly intelligent, ambitious people on your team that are actively trying to solve problems that you're not even aware of. That's a good feeling.
Definitely. So let's take the founder mindset in a different direction with an exercise. How would, using the founder mindset, how would you approach decision making when it comes to scaling an Amazon business?
Yeah. First thing I would look at is fixed versus variable costs. I think a lot of people want to have a warehouse because it looks nice on social media. And there is a case where that does start to make sense. But in the early days, you should be using a prep center. It costs you more per unit, but it costs you less in total, right? So variable costs typically comes first. And then what happens is you're like, okay, well, it's going to cost me, let's just call it $2,000 a month to have a warehouse and staff for this example. Up until it's costing me $2,000 a month at my prep center, I'm going to use a prep center. But when it eclipses that, I now have to make a decision. Do I care more about lowering that cost? So I'm going to fix the cost instead of it being variable. Or do I stay with the variable because the opportunity of that is I don't have to manage people, have the warehouse, all that good stuff. So you can start to make financial decisions differently, right? I think that's a big one. And number two, yeah, it's building a team. I think that's a big thing, right? Like you have to start building. It's funny. Like a lot of sellers will be like, oh, I know my process. And then they'll hire somebody, make them watch over their shoulder on a Zoom call and be like, that's how you do it. That's not documentation. That's not like all your experiences. You should have a note that is just like, here's how I source. And when you learn something, it goes into the note. That is your bread and butter. And you should routinely only work from your note, like follow it step by step and see where it breaks. Because what you don't want to have happen is you hire somebody, they come in and they're not really set up for success, right? You want to be able to give that 80% that you know to be working really well and say, just start here. They don't need to start where you started. That makes no sense. You already gained all this experience and skill. So you want it to be transferable. So like when we hired Finn for support, our first hire, I was like, dude, here's like 30 SOPs I've written for myself. Just start here, and it just reduced the time. It took him, I think it was like 2 weeks to fully onboard, which I was still impressed by. But then the next hire took 1 week, and then the next hire took 2 days. And so we can speed up that process. Why? Because Finn's going, oh, here's what I wish I had learned during the onboarding. Okay, cool. Let's factor that into my docs. And he's adding to the internal knowledge base. You want to think about your business almost like a person, right? Like where's the brain? Where's the intelligence being stored? Big fan of using Notion for these things. And in the beginning, it's going to feel silly. You're like, why am I writing an SOP for myself? Well, one, it's going to help you avoid pitfalls and mistakes you've made previously, which is a good thing. And two, it's easily transferable. And then when you transfer it to somebody else, that person can now build on top of it and make it even more better. But again, those are like counterintuitive things. You're like, well, I'm just the guy. Yeah. What if you weren't? And maybe you shouldn't be, but you again, you can transfer these things in a way that sets up your new hires for success. Because a lot of people are just like, I just hired you. You should just be able to do it. No. Your responsibility is to set them up for success and find the best type of person for that role and then let them go. It's just a different thing. Yeah.
I know that you keep your finger on the pulse of AI. We've talked about it several times. You've already thrown out some tools.
Yeah.
What are the maybe 2 or 3 max AI tools that we should be looking into and maybe even using in our businesses?
Yeah, so I get asked this enough. I finally updated my personal blog, so I'm going to throw this in the comments. I'll go over them. I'm going to throw this, or I can't. That's okay. So I have a growing list of ones. It's funny. There's this spectrum of like it's really cool and novel, but not really usable yet that I like to experiment with, and then things that just work. So I'm going to focus on the things that just work. Perplexity is my number one. It replaces Google. So it will actually go through all the URLs that you would have to do manually, give you the answer, and then tell you where it found the answer. So in terms of like learning, it's fantastic. If you do a lot of meetings, Granola is actually really nice. So a lot of people use like Fireflies. So it'll actually have an agent join the call, which is so awkward when it's just you two plus like this AI in the background. Granola doesn't do that. So nobody knows. So it just takes the input from your Mac audio, and you can take your chicken scratch notes. And then when the meeting's done, you hit fill out basically, and it will take the transcripts and organize it really well. So you get great notes. That's fantastic. For note taking, I just use Reflect. I think that's pretty good. I don't really use a lot of their AI stuff, but they have AI built into it. I just like it for note taking. Clay is really nice. So it's clay.earth is really good for like a personal CRM. You can also use this if you're doing wholesale where like you have these relationships. That's really fantastic. For email, Superhuman is probably one of the best things I've ever discovered. It's like $30 a month for an email client, but I promise you it's worth it if you're in your inbox daily. That paired with Howie, which is currently my top favorite actually. Howie, instead of sending you like a cal.com or Calendly link, I just CC Howie. It's hooked up to my email. It's got a bunch of rules. And I just say, hey, Howie, find us a time next Tuesday to chat. And it goes, cool. It'll check my calendar, understand the context of the email. It'll then respond to that thread and say, hey, Dylan's available at 9 and 10 a.m. on Tuesday. You'll respond 10 a.m. Sounds great. It'll say, awesome. Add it to our calendars and then add Zoom. So the moment I CC Howie, I'm out of it. And if you responded back and said, hey, actually, can we do 9? It'll take care of the rescheduling for me. That's fantastic. And then Raycast, they have AI built in. I don't really use it. It's really just like a better app launcher, but you can build your quick links and snippets and auto expanders and all that cool stuff. So if you're using a Mac, you should be using Raycast. That's the first thing I tell everybody to install. It just makes it faster for you to move on your computer. And you can create different automations and all that cool stuff. But you can definitely chat with AI on the Pro version. I just use the regular because I can't use anybody else's Mac if they don't have Raycast. The big thing right now, there's 5 levels of AI that OpenAI talks about. Level 1 is basically chat, what we've kind of had. Level 2 is human-based reasoning. We just reached this with the new O1 preview model. And we haven't even gotten full O1 yet, which apparently will be even better. Level 3 is agents. The time it takes us to transition between these levels is compressing. So how long it took us to go from level 1 to level 2, probably 6-ish months, up to a year, depending on how you want to measure it. 2 to 3 is probably going to be 3-ish months. So the big push right now is in 2025, it will be the era of AI agents. This will be the thing that changes everything, in my opinion, because this allows us to get to a point where you're not just chatting with AI back and forth. You're saying, here's all the data. I want you to help me solve this problem. Take a week to do it. And it goes, cool. And it can have access to tools. It can have access to the internet and go and help you solve these problems. Or just do things for you. Like, I hate booking flights. I can't tell you why. I love flying. But I want to have an AI that understands my seat preferences, fly out preference for time, everything, and just say, hey, I need to fly to Boston next Tuesday. It goes, cool, got you. It knows how much I want to spend on average. It knows where I want to seat, and it just does everything for me. We're getting there. And so at AMZ United, I actually gave a presentation talking about this. Like, you will get to a world where you can have 10 PhD level IQ AIs that are helping you run your business. So I think, going back to the concept of like when and how you should hire, I think a lot of that's going to change, because you may not need to hire somebody to manage your inventory management like we talked about. You might be able to give an AI that, and it could do it 10 times faster, better, not take vacation. And it's just, you just ask it, like, we're going to get to a world where you have these AI co-pilots that understand your business better than you ever could. And that's going to be a superpower. And so while we're not there yet, the components are already there. So it's not a technical limitation. It's just putting the Lego pieces in the right order. And I tell everybody, there's not a lot of, if any, AI related software just for Amazon quite yet. There's some that are starting to crop up, but you need to start playing with these things to understand how they work, so that when we do come online with things like agents, you're able to pick those things up faster. Because again, you're going to get to a point where you're not hiring more VAs to scale your sourcing. You're standing up one AI agent that's going to source Walmart 24/7. You're going to have another one that's going to, be on VitaCost sourcing 24/7. They're going to feed leads back to a third AI that's going to analyze everything, check your bank accounts and say, how much money, we got $5,000 to spend out of all the things I can buy. How do I optimize this? And then go and place the orders for you. Like, we will get there. The components of all those moving pieces already are possible. It's just, again, putting the Lego pieces together in a way that suits this use case, but it will happen. And I think that's a good thing, right? Because you're not hiring people to do tasks, you're hiring for their intelligence. Well, the cost of intelligence is going down while the access to the intelligence is going up. So, hiring a VA for $8 an hour sounds great, but what happens when you can hire a PhD level mathematician for $100 a month?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's fundamentally going to change everything. And I think it's going to give you superpowers, to be honest.
What you just said there likely would strike fear in the heart of an Amazon seller. We thrive on, finding the opportunity and then leveraging that opportunity until that opportunity disappears.
Sure.
That's just the nature of markets and cycles. And then they come back.
Yeah.
And so, of course, people worry, oh, well, AI is going to, it's going to make supply chains perfect. And when there is no, when there is not some sort of, unevenness in the supply chain, of course, we would be gone.
Yeah.
So can you tell me why that's not going to happen?
Yeah. I've thought about this for a while, right? Because we call this arbitrage, right? Well, arbitrage exists because of an inefficient market. Most arbitrage events or scenarios do change, right? There's a reason why, 10 years ago, arbitrage was very different than it is today. It's going to evolve. I don't think it's going to go away. It's just going to change. And when I said previously in the conversation, like speed and complexity, like here's where speed comes into play. It's not just about like, can you find the opportunities? It's how fast can you find these opportunities? AI can do that much faster. It can do it in theory in real time. So it's not just that though. It's also what are the opportunities that sellers are missing because they're blind to it, right? Like a lot of sellers say, well, you need to go find a smaller e-commerce store to source from, not Vitacost, because everybody's there. So this is already occurring, but it will occur faster. So you can have more saturation, right? It's easy for everybody to say, we got 100 AIs sourcing from Vitacost. Okay, cool. That's no longer the opportunity. The opportunity now is finding the other opportunities, right? Like the other places we can source from. So I think it will just evolve. And why can't you have an AI that you say, hey, go find me a cool, go source all these different types of suppliers we could work with and test it. There is if we're thinking about this academically, if we extrapolate it out to perfect efficiency, yes, it goes away. I don't think that's how this works, though. There's always inefficiency somewhere. And it's either you view that as an opportunity or you wrap up shop. But this has always been true, right? Like you guys have been in Amazon space longer than I have. Like you've seen this occur every year. Amazon's done. That's it. It's saturated. We're still here. We always have been. Has it changed and evolved? Of course it has. But that's every industry. And if you have this anti-fragile mindset, this abundance mindset of, I know it will change. I don't know how, but let me look out into the world and try to think about how it could. And then operate with that in mind. It will change how you make decisions. I view it as an opportunity. I think it's one of the coolest things. I've never been a doomer on AI. I've always been an optimist. Now, do certain things go away? Yes, but new things get created too. So you have to look for the opportunities and think about the upside. I mean, don't worry about like Amazon ruining something. Think about what it would enable you to do. If you could, I don't think enough people can fully grasp that you could have 10 PhD level IQ AIs for like $1,000 a month. You would be able to outcompete massive e-commerce companies who are not doing that. So the way you're going to be able to compete changes for the good, but you have to be willing to learn those things and get on board because they are coming. But this is why I play with the things that you can only really play with via code. And I'm not a software engineer, but I'm like, I want to understand just what is possible. Whether I can use it today or not is not the problem or the question. It's if this is technically possible, it will become practically possible in 3 to 6 months. What does that mean for us as a company? Does that mean we need to hire differently? Does that mean I give that tool to our team so they are able to crush it even better and their lives are easier? Probably. But we are exponentially growing with AI. And so I mentioned the 3 levels. Level 4 is innovators. Like they're actually discovering new things. That's more important for scientific things. But level 5 is organizations, entire organizations. What if you could have a CFO AI agent? It looked at your books, it did all those tasks, and it helped you optimize your taxes. It told you what you could and couldn't spend on. And it cost you $100 a month. Like these are things that as small businesses, we cannot afford. Yeah, you can get a fractional CFO all day long, but it's still going to cost you, $5,000 a month. But what if it didn't? And right? So like there's this latent potential in all these small businesses where they could be making better decisions and growing faster and avoiding these bottlenecks and these mistakes that they just can't do because the only capacity of intelligence is just you. But what if you tenfolded that? I mean, that's powerful. And what are the ideas that you have, like a private label product? What if you have an awesome idea? You're like, man, I just don't have the capital. I need to hire some people. I don't have the time. I don't know how to do it. But what if all those things went away? What if you could do it now? And so we have this latent potential as a species that we could possibly tap into. I mean, you have problems. We all do. What if the friction for solving those problems, even the small ones, disappeared? that's what we're talking about here. So, when people are very doom and gloom about it, I'm like, I don't think you're thinking about it from, listen, science fiction's awesome. I'm a big sci-fi guy, but all the movies related to AI are Terminator. So naturally, that's where we go. That's our reference point. Why? Because it's boring to create a utopian society of AI where things go great. That's boring. But it's equal, right? If we have no idea, it's 50-50. Well, that means it's just as equal to be awesome as in to be bad. So if you're going to bias towards negativity, you might as well reverse that a little bit. So I think you should be testing these things because it's here. It's not 2 years from now. It's here today. And every 3-ish months, it fundamentally changes. It just gets more powerful and less expensive. And so it's creating a level of access that's going to make the average person powerful in whatever way they want that to be in your business, in your personal life. It doesn't matter. And so the things that are holding you back as a founder, as a business owner, are going to start to melt away. That's huge. It's absolutely huge.
I agree with you. It is going to be fascinating, and it's surprising how many people are hesitant to kind of make sure that they're playing around with what's out there, and well, it's not going to do anything, or whatever it is. I think you're right. There are too many people who are Skynet is coming, not enough people who are, we've got food synthesizers, on the way.
I'm a Trekkie, so I naturally go towards the positive because I'm like, no, dude, this is gonna be sick.
Yeah, fascinating.
So basically, watch more Star Trek and less Star Wars is what I'm gonna say.
Oh, Chris, you're muted.
Doom and gloom is the easy stuff to come up with. It's easy to envision catastrophe. Scott Galloway made a great point. He said, people were scared of Henry Ford and the innovation that he brought. He said it's going to take away jobs, and it did. The problem is we didn't factor in the innovation. He also created brand new industries. Nobody knew that there was going to be a whole seatbelt industry. Nobody knew that there were going to be car stereos, and the computer components. It proliferated more industries, and that's the part that we can't get our heads wrapped around. So that's interesting. But before Tom Cruise or Will Smith show up to investigate an AI murder that hasn't happened yet, I want to talk about the 4 virtual walls of a modern day Amazon business, right? The people listening to this now, what are some processes or tasks that can be automated right now?
Yeah, so listing optimization, this is starting to change. Smart Scout came out with a version of this that helps. A lot of resellers are not doing listing optimization because it either takes too much time or costs money to have somebody do it for you. And if you're not going to be on the listing for years, what's the point? But if that weren't true, you probably should still do it. So we're in the early phases. You still have to manually go in and choose a few things, but I think we'll get to a point soon where that will just happen passively in the background. But I urge you to do that. If you don't have a ton of listings, or you have a few listings that are doing, 40, 50% of your revenue, you should be looking at those things, even for RAOA. The biggest thing I think is having a brainstorming partner. When you have an idea, you want to think through something, jumping into ChatGPT using the new O1 preview model, and giving it as much context as you can will just help you kind of work through some problems and help you kind of shift your thinking. And then Perplexity. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, we're founders, we're business owners. There's a lot that we don't know that we need to learn fast. Being able to quickly have a question, throw it into Perplexity and get an actual answer and a jumping off point is a speed up. That's a massive boost. So whether that's learning best practices from manufacturing, logistics, what have you, or just like, what the heck does this term even mean? Default to Perplexity. That's the best thing you could do. And then again, just get as much data on your business as you can for the future. You're not gonna want to have all these things become real and you be like, cool, help me optimize this. Is like, cool, well, I've got like a day's worth of data, man. Like that's not how this works. You want to be storing this information, or it could be stored in Seller Central. That's not a problem, but just be mindful of, are you retaining that valuable fuel for what's to come? I think that's a big thing. And documentation, right? Documentation is really good for AI agents. If you can document how you do certain things, in some cases, you can actually hand that over to an AI agent now, or build out something in make.com that uses LLMs that can help you automate some of these things. I would say those are probably the top ones. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I used ChatGPT to I had some listings become suppressed, and it was because of product description.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I mean, I don't wear makeup, so I have no idea what
Right.
these doohickeys are for. And so I just took the description from the source site and I put it in there, and I said, hey,
Yeah.
I said, act as a tenured Amazon SEO specialist and help
Yep.
me write a product description based on this product description from the the actual brand website.
Right.
And sure enough, I got something that was very, very good. Uploaded it, and actually, I think it was one hit on both of them. Both
Nice.
of them became unsuppressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So let me ask this question, because in today's world of AI, it's still very prompt based.
Yeah.
So how do we become better prompt engineers to use the
Mhm.
tools that we have available better?
I think you become better at communication. Prompt engineering is becoming less important with some of the newer models, like O1 Preview. The way you prompt is slightly different. You actually don't want to be overly verbose. But think about like actually talking to a human. Sometimes you want to just be like, well, I just want this done. This is AI. I should just be able to understand the subtle nuances of what I mean, and it doesn't. Like as an example, if I'm wanting to write some copy and I have my draft, what I'll do is I'll create tags. So I'll do like open caret, draft, close caret, my drafts copy, close that out. And then I'll say, hey, I have this draft, and I'll reference that. Here's basically what I'm trying to do. And I'll be very verbose about that. And then I'll hit enter. So I can't just say, make this better. How do you define better?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I have to say, well, I want this to flow better in terms of the argument that I'm making. And I want to tie this back to that. How do I do that with my current draft? So I'm breaking out exactly what I want, which requires more thinking. A lot of times we just want to throw it and hope it's perfect. That's not true. I gave a presentation to our team on prompt engineering. And I gave here's me just asking what I want. And it was garbage. And here's me asking what I want, preempting, saying, hey, pretend you're a smart AI assistant, like kind of giving it some context, breaking things out, giving examples. So like if you have things that, if you have examples of great listings in terms of like the structure, great, include 2 or 3 of those and say, hey, understand the structure of this. That's what I want you to apply. Don't worry about the wording, just the structure. Okay, cool. That'll be more consistent. So it's just like working with a VA in a lot of cases, right? You're like, hey, here's how I want you to do this. Here's enough context so you can do it yourself. And here's basically what I expect out of it. You do that, you're in a good position. So I might say, hey, I've got this draft and it's really messy. Here's the draft. Here's an example of my previous writing. Update the draft to match my writing style. And it'll say, okay, cool. Here's exactly how you would do it. And so now I can kind of skip that step of like really going back in and trying to tweak it. And keep in mind, it's not going to be 100%, right? Like you're not trying to get to 100%. You're trying to get to like 90%, and then you make a few tweaks and you move on. Mm-hmm. But I like to say that AI helps avoid the blank page problem, whatever that is. So if you're like, I've got this problem, I have no idea where to start. Great. Here's my problem. I don't know where to start. Give me 5 ideas of how I could start to dive into this that would make sense. And okay, what's the type of person who would do this routinely? Oh, it's a data analyst. Okay, pretend you're a data analyst. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, cool. Like these are some jumping off points. That will help a ton.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. We're getting an hour and a half into this. One of the questions I always love to ask you, especially, is what books, podcasts, or blog posts have you read over the past 90 days that have had an impact on you?
So I am not listening to podcasts anymore because I don't really travel as much. So I don't have any. I don't know. Podcasts were great. I feel like they've really lessened as of late. Even blogs, man. It's hard for me to find good blogs these days.
He says on a podcast.
Yeah, I know. At least in our space, it's pretty good. But you know, like the Tim Ferrisses and stuff, they got out of like the whole cool lifestyle hacking stuff. It's like a little too deep now, and like I just don't have like an hour to like sit down and just listen. On the reading front, oh gosh, I've actually been jumping into more history. I got into a real big Winston Churchill phase, so I'm reading a lot of Winston Churchill stuff. No more champagne.
You've entered your World War II era.
I have.
You're a dad now. You know, you're a little older. You've entered your World War II era. Welcome.
I have.
Enjoy.
So No More Champagne is like a biography of Winston Churchill through his personal finances, which is like so interesting because he actually struggled really badly with personal finances. So that's been a good book. And then I've been reading a lot more like secret society kind of stuff. I'm getting into that now. So just reading a lot more history. It's funny. I've been reading a lot less business related books because you read enough of them and you kind of find the patterns, and a lot of them don't say anything necessarily new. And so it's a bit difficult for me to find books where I'm unlocking a new nugget of wisdom. So I've kind of just been going to history lately, and really studying people is what I've been doing.
I listened to someone that I respect, and they said what I thought was a really bad take. They said that, reading history and biographies was entertainment disguised as learning. And I was like, I don't really agree with that.
I disagree.
history repeats itself. Things might look different. We may have AI now and things like that, but I think we can really learn from the people who have done what we're looking to do. I'm reading a biography on Kurt Kerkorian right now, which is fascinating. Just a fascinating guy. And one of the first moguls in Vegas, and the things he did to grow that. But some of the takeaways, I'm like, oh, that applies to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And it's great. All right.
There's a concept called Lindy, the Lindy effect. So basically if something has been relevant for 50 years, you can basically expect it to still be relevant in another 50 years. So that kind of goes against that comment, right? It's like, you should go back into history and learn those things. If you want a good book on AI, though, that I did recently read, Life 3.0, that's a good book. It's by Max Tegart, I think. He's a professor. That's a really good read.
Okay. And of course, people are going to want to go learn about Aura, which of course I'm going to have a link down in the description, which is going to be an affiliate link, and any discounts that I've got available for you guys. But people want to go learn about Aura. They want to follow you. Where do you want to send people to go learn more?
Yeah. We write a weekly blog at goaura.com/blog. We try to dive into some cool stuff there. I'm active mainly on Twitter. So it's Dylan_Carter. We're also very active as a company on Twitter. So we try to be very open there. Every week as a company, we do something called live office hours. So on Wednesdays from 2 to 3 p.m. EST, we go live. And we just ask people to bring questions, and we dive into different rabbit holes and teach on different things. It's really just like if you went to a professor who was just like, I'm going to be here for an hour, ask me anything you want. That's what we do. So we're doing a lot of that stuff. But yeah, just give us I highly recommend, if you're looking for a repricing tool, go through a free trial. Don't give anybody a credit card. Go through a free trial, schedule an onboarding, and you'll know very quickly if it's a good fit for you or not. I will say, if you start to use Aura, you may become fanatic about it. The amount of shirts I'm shipping out these days is growing. So you'll probably love us, but give it a try. When people are like, hey, can you sell me on Aura? I always say, we don't do that here. Go try it and you tell me. But yeah, give us a try. Especially, listen, going into Q4, this is going to matter the most. It's a nice thing to have rest of the year, but Q4 is when it really starts to matter. And are you going to be maximizing that opportunity by 40% or 80%? That's kind of up to you. But repricing is how you jump those numbers.
as we wrap up, I'll tell you what, I'm going to pop this link into the show notes. Check out repricerchallenge.com. Okay. Hidden in that course is a way to understand repricing. But hidden inside there is a very special way to try out Aura that you can't find anywhere else. So unfortunately, that's all I can really say about it. So, but check that out. And I'll make sure that's down below as well. You know this. We end the show every week with a quote of the week, and this one is from W. Edwards Deming. A bad system will beat a good person every time. I thought that was apropos with someone who's a systems thinker like yourself.
Deming is a godfather.
Yeah. So, Dylan, I appreciate you coming on here, man. Always great to talk to you.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
All right. That's the pod, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to Clear the Shelf with Chris and Chris. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a screenshot on your phone and share to Facebook, Instagram, or your favorite FBA group, and be sure to tag me and let me know why you liked it and what you'd like to hear more from us in the future. Also, I'd like to give you some free gifts for listening. Head over to rabbittrailchallenge.com and repricerchallenge.com for some free courses to further your business. Thanks for listening.